especially when I'm working with a majority conservative body of other elected officials and I need their votes, I have to work in the realm of what's possible. And I wouldn't be doing my friends in the advocacy community any favors if I misrepresented how difficult this work is and how incremental it sometimes has to be from the inside. Another thing I'll say about being an elected official versus being an advocate or an activist is a lot of people who come from activism don't have a tolerance for this. And I think that's fine. I totally respect that. I don't have any judgment of that. Sometimes on the inside, things move too slowly. But there are different rule books that you get to use when you're an advocate versus when you're a lawmaker. When you're trying to bring change from inside versus outside of a system. I will always be part of the outside the system, but like I said, I wouldn't be doing that sector of advocates any favors if I made it think that it was really easy to make change. But that doesn't mean we don't try. I just have a really, really high tolerance personally for the slog, for the slow pace that change takes. And I think that we do need people like me who are elected, who are more radical, who are more far left, who have tolerance for that slow pace of change so that, there's someone on the inside who keeps pushing on it. That's why in Nebraska, I've introduced a lot of legislation that is a really heavy lift. And I will continue to, because I want my elected officials to do what's right, not what's easy. So that means that's what I have to do too.
Awesome. And you are right. You take on a lot of radical things here in Nebraska. And I remember, because I moved to Minneapolis in 2018, but I remember reading stories and seeing on Twitter all the work that you were doing from the get-go of getting into the unicameral. So that's awesome.
Thanks. I think that some ideas, you have to try them for years before you get any movement on it. And that doesn't mean it was wrong to try. It doesn't mean it was a waste of time. I mean, Senator Chambers began so I have a colleague named Senator Ernie Chambers, and he's been in the legislature for almost 50 years. For most of his time, he was the only Black man elected in the Nebraska legislature, and he's very radical. So if you don't know who Ernie Chambers is, that would be a really fun thing for you to Google. But he has led the charge in Nebraska against the death penalty. And in almost 50 years, he has not succeeded. We still have the death penalty in Nebraska, but that doesn't prevent him year after year from introducing a bill to get rid of the death penalty. So when he's term limited and when he's gone, that's work that somebody's going to have to continue to do. And it doesn't mean it's not worth it just because we don't get it done.
Awesome. And I think we have a question from Stefan. So Andy, if you could unmute Stefan.
There you go.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. You said that previous your state was pretty conservative and now you're going towards progressive. I was just wondering if you would use any of Lakoff's reframing ideas to help push you on, help progress to the progressive state you're in now.
Is it Stefan or Stephen?
Stephen.
Stephen, thank you for that question. So Nebraska is not progressive. I don't think that anything I've done has helped make it more progressive. I just have some comfort being a progressive in a very big conservative pond. So no, I'm very outnumbered and it's very difficult to gather the votes to make anything happen. So yeah, his idea about framing is really important because you have to put things in terms as a lawmaker that speak to someone else's values. So when I'm talking to a conservative colleague about, we just talked about the death penalty, so maybe the death penalty, or we could talk about minimum wage, raising one battle that I've really taken on in Nebraska is raising our sub-minimum wage. A lot of people don't know that there's actually two minimum wages. There's the minimum wage, which in Nebraska is $9 an hour. And then we also have a sub-minimum wage, which is what tipped workers can earn. So if you work for tips, if you're a bartender or a server, you get the sub-minimum wage. In Nebraska, that's $2.13 an hour. So kind of a fight that I've picked up personally is to raise that sub-minimum wage. And one thing that I talk to conservatives when I try to convince them to support this is I talk about when people earn such a low wage, it causes them to be more of a drain on public resources. Like, these are people who are more likely to take advantage of SNAP and food assistance. These are people who are more likely to take advantage of public housing or Medicaid. And so if we put the onus on business owners to raise that wage, it's actually going to free up taxpayer dollars for other things that they want to do, like property tax relief or whatever they have conservative priorities on. So that's exactly what he's talking about, is that framing and saying, if I try to convince you of this idea based on my principles and my values, you're never going to care. So I have to speak to you in your language, with your values, through your lens of the world, if we're going to make any progress on finding agreement.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephen, for your question. And I believe David Thames has a question.
Hi, I'm not going to quote the entire thing that I put in the chat, but Dave Gold wrote a really great piece in Politico called "Data-Driven Campaigns Are Killing the Democratic Party," where he basically was critiquing Democratic policy that's so focused on polls and data and all this kind of stuff instead of actually telling a story. And a lot of people have been saying this, that the Democrats have no message, no story, and Trump basically owns the narrative. He has defined the story, defined the issues. He's a brilliant storyteller, as Randy Olson has described in great detail in his book, Narrative is Everything. What's going on with the Democratic Party at a grassroots level that's going to change this?
Well, that's a tough question. I just clicked on this link so I can read this piece because I haven't read it. I'm first and foremost a state and local person. I don't let the congressional races or the presidential race take up a lot of real estate in my mind. I actually don't think that there's a lot of crossover for voters between Republican and Democrat when it comes to nationwide races. I am obsessed with politics at the state and local level. That's the most important thing to me. And perhaps a problem that the Democratic Party has is that they don't have an inspiring pipeline of candidates. This is a conversation that's happening right now with the vice presidential nominee. It's like, we have some really great options, but do we really have a bench of qualified, amazing candidates in the Democratic Party at the national level? I don't know. I don't know if I could say that. So I don't see myself as very partisan, and I'm not very interested personally in what parties do. And I also know that this is a limitation that I have, and I would probably be better off as a lawmaker and a candidate and a politician if I cared more about the party. But part of that attitude I have is also influenced by the unique political structure we have in Nebraska. In Nebraska, we have the only nonpartisan legislature in the country. So even though I'm a registered Democrat, we have an officially nonpartisan body. It's also the only one-chamber house in the country. So we don't have a House and a Senate. It's just one body of lawmakers. It's the smallest legislature in the country with only 49 state senators. And we don't have any party leadership or any caucuses or any aisles at all. And so I've really internalized this kind of Nebraska idea of nonpartisanship. And that's how I campaign too. So what I would say to Democratic candidates who want to have more electoral success through telling a story, through making people feel emotional about their campaigns. People want candidates that they can feel emotional about. And no one is going to feel emotional about you through polling or through, robocalls. And candidates really, really have to get out there and knock the doors and go to events and be a presence in the community. And then that will pay dividends, 5, 10, 15 years down the road as this person continues to be involved in the community or involved in electoral politics. And I don't know the answer for Democrats. I mean, that's not really my focus. But I'm a state and local elected politician. And so my biggest concern is just understanding the people who elected me and being part of the community that put me where I am, because I'm really just kind of passing through. This isn't my seat, you know, it's not, doesn't belong to me. I'm just there because the voters thought I was the best choice in this one time, but that might not be the case next time. So I don't know, maybe people are too concerned with power and ego or something, but I don't know.
Well, and I think too, Megan, what I have always appreciated out of you is it's very apparent that you are in this role, like you take it very relationally, just through all that you do as a senator, through, you know, just social media engagement. You're very accessible. And you know, talking with you last summer, like you literally knocked on almost every door. Did you knock on every door in your district?
I don't know. No, I mean,
No? Okay.
that's hard. I knocked on 22,000 doors. So that's a lot, but
Yeah. But you are a relational public official. And that's part of why I asked you to join, is because we really believe in the power of relationships at the grassroots level and getting people involved, getting people engaged, and getting them to really you know, take more action at that grassroots, because relationships matter way more than that robocall or the random call you get from someone in California calling you.
You can't fundraise that either. Like, you can't fundraise more value than a personal relationship. And that's something that I think candidates are looking for, like a campaign in a box. They're looking for like a one size fits all training. I meet candidates all the time, and I do a lot of consulting with other candidates, and they say, you know, oh, I went to a training in DC, I went to a training in New York, I went to a training with the DCCC. Like, great, but no one in your fucking neighborhood knows who you are. And so, like, you can't pay or pull or fundraise that away. That's a problem. And you know, you just have to remove yourself from the work, because being a state senator is not the most interesting thing about me. It's not the most interesting thing that I'm ever going to do. And you can't have like personal ownership of it. You have to just be there to do the job.
So our next question kind of shifts gear and goes towards an issue that is right here, right now, and is very much an issue even in our city of Omaha. And so there, you know, and I've gotten a lot of alerts from NPR, CNN, Washington Post today, all about the message, defund the police or abolish the police. And so just curious on your thoughts on how do you frame the message around that issue? And do you think those slogans or hashtags are appropriate and clearly communicate the message that progressives want to see through policy and reform?
So this goes back to the point I made earlier about the type of rule book you have, the types of rules you get to play by when you're an activist versus when you're an elected official. I campaigned on, and I've always believed that we should abolish ICE. And when I was campaigning, that was like way too spicy for people. Like, this is way too radical of an idea. How can we get rid of this ICE organization that is actually like a relatively very new organization, and I don't think it's necessary at all. And people thought this was really crazy and really wild. But now people are saying abolish police. And you look at what's happening in Minneapolis with the entire city council saying, yeah, we're going to completely restructure our police department, and it's going to be something new. That's something that I'm watching very closely, because whatever they do will potentially end up being a blueprint for what other communities choose to do. I'm not, when we talk about framing, so I'm not personally participating in the abolish the police hashtag or messaging, because the reason is because it means something different to so many people. And when you only have like 280 characters in a tweet, or you have like a little picture that you can post on Instagram, it's really hard to explain the legal nuance and the policy that is going to replace that, and how we're going to do something else that's actually better for people. So personally, you know, I do think we should defund the police, and I talk about that. I've seen a lot of people tweeting, and I've seen a lot of pictures on Instagram of people making the point that why is it so radical to say defund the police when we've been defunding healthcare and education and housing and all of these other things for so long? And I completely agree with that. But in terms of policy, my background is not in criminal justice, and I don't have any experience or authority in criminal justice. So what I see my role as right now is to listen to experts who have experience in criminal justice, and also to listen to the Black community where I live and understand how they want to be helped and how policing should change to better meet the needs that they have been completely excluded from because of this racist system. So speaking about what Minneapolis is potentially doing, getting rid of their police system or replacing it or changing it, whatever they're going to end up doing, I'm concerned about what the country could look like in 3 to 5 years when we have a patchwork of policing systems across our country. I ask, you know, how could this further divide us politically? We're already so politically divided. So, you know, what is that going to look like in the long term? But things I support and things I have supported with my votes, with the bills I've introduced and will continue to, are decriminalizing nonviolent crimes like drug charges, more restorative justice, you know, not looking at locking people up as the first line of, you know, the first thing we're going to do when someone commits a crime, and also not locking people up to destroy their lives, but looking at how we can bring more restoration into our criminal justice system. Also direct democracy, so people feel more involved, where people are more represented, where the elected officials that we have at the state and local and national level actually reflect the demographics of the people they serve. I mean, I was the first person from the LGBTQ plus community elected in the legislature, and I'm like a very vanilla white lady. And so it just shows like how long it took us to get there and how much farther we really have to go, especially here in Nebraska. Other things we need to fund instead of the police: mental health care, funding education. And again, I'm inclined to listen to and follow the experts on this because that's not me. I see myself as a channel for policy to flow through, that's been, you know, explained to me by the people who know better. So COVID-19 has made that really difficult though. There's a lot of meetings that we need to be having and a lot of conversations that I would like to be having with community leaders that are really difficult right now because of the pandemic. So yeah, I have a lot of colleagues who have a lot more experience in this area, and I'm inclined to listen to them and then bring in the perspectives from the community leaders that I have.
Thank you. Our next question is, so, and we got 3 minutes, so I want to honor your time because we said 30 minutes. So,
I feel like I'm rambling a lot, so sorry.
Actually, I don't know if it's me, but you're a little quicker than our last few guests. So
Our last couple of guests, actually.
Well, I love chatting with you, so I could do like 5 more minutes if
okay,
it's okay
cool.
with you guys.
Cool.
And a reminder, if you have questions, pop them in the chat as well. So Dr. Lakoff argues that conservative voters are unified. They get unified right away behind the candidate or cause that they're concerned about. As a Nebraska state official and just in general, how do you feel progressives can become unified, either here in your own community, in your state, or as a nation?
I think about this all the time, and I totally agree with Lakoff's point that conservative voters are much more unified. And I think that there's something psychological about that. I think that conservatives are much more comfortable with authority. I think they're more willing to follow. I think they accept leadership more readily than progressives do. Progressives, by our nature, we're against authority. And we all kind of have our own idea about how things should be done and how we can improve systems. And sometimes there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, right? I think about my own state party and my own county party with the Democrats in Nebraska. And it's kind of a mess, you guys. Like, a lot of people who are progressive minded don't want to be involved in it. And I can't really blame them, because it's really kind of a big group of diverse people who all want to be heard and who all think they have the right idea with no like solid leadership. And that is not a problem that the state Republican Party has or the county Republican Party has. Their leader just says, here's how it's going to be. And everybody goes, that sure sounds good. And they unite behind the same candidates, and they fundraise together, and they share the same messaging. And there's a sector of people where psychologically that's really appealing to them. And so the answer for progressives can't be to copy that. You know, we don't want to be like that, because that's not fundamentally who we are psychologically or in terms of our values. So I don't know. I think about this all the time. Another thing I've said, you know, particularly with the Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton race in 2016, it's really hard to talk conservatives out of a bad candidate. And it's really hard to talk progressives into a good candidate. And I think that has something to do with our comfort with authority. So I don't know the answer, but this is an area that I eagerly continue to read about and read the research on. And I am inclined to think that that solution is somewhere in state and local politics. You know, I have Republican and independent constituents who trust me, who don't agree with me on things like abortion or race, you know, racial issues or immigration issues or many things, but they trust me because they know I'm not gonna bullshit them. I'm not gonna lie to them. And maybe the answer is somewhere in that, that we need to build more trust and democracy on the state and local level by running better candidates, by expanding the access to that vote and fighting voter suppression, donating to candidates who aren't likely to have, you know, institutional old boy network approval. And I think that's going to be the work of my lifetime, and maybe some of you too.
Were you a run for something endorsed candidate?
Yes.
Okay, I wondered since you were on that call, but Amanda Littman would be snapping this whole conversation. but you know, Dr. Lakoff, he specifically mentioned how trust is a progressive value, and
What is progressive value?
Trust.
Oh, yeah.
And really making sure that we continue to elect candidates, and I think you're right, like building that bench so that more and more progressive voices and voices that we trust at the local level, and then naturally they will rise, you know, to that more national level. So I like that approach, and it's not going to change over time either. And then as progressives, we have to be okay with that as well, because not all change comes instantly. And so really putting the work in every single day for year after year.
Yeah, it's really hard. I just try to mind my business. Like, that may be kind of one of my most overarching personal values, is I just try to mind my damn business. And the things that I'm focused on changing, I work on that every day. And in the meantime, you know, I take my daughter to school. I talk to the people in the schoolyard. I go to the coffee shop. I go to the grocery store. I listen to everybody who wants to talk to me. And over time, hopefully that continues to build that trust. And if not, they'll vote me out. So that's the system.
Yeah. Well, one last question. In this last part of the book, Lakoff talks about the values of progressives. And so what would you say are your top 3 values as a progressive?
Whose dog is that?
That's mine. Sorry, just a sec.
What's your dog's name?
That's Cooper. He's a 90-pound puppy.
It doesn't bother me. I'm just curious. So my top 3 values are, well, first, transparency. That's my top value, absolutely, is especially in government. I mean, when everything we're doing, from policing to fighting COVID-19 to educating everybody in our population to building roads, everything is funded by you and me. Everything is funded by all of us. And so when people in government want to obscure or hide how money's being used, who's getting contracts, what the processes are for accountability, that is something I'm just viscerally against. And one reason I think I've had some success as a progressive in the legislature is because this is sort of a nonpartisan attitude. I mean, I have a lot of Republican and independent colleagues who share that value of government transparency, especially with taxpayer money. My second highest value is freedom. One thing that has been kind of a mantra for me for many years, since before I ever thought about running for office, is I don't do anything for the money, I do it for freedom. It's very important to me to have a lot of freedom in my life and be able to pursue what I'm personally interested in. And so that's one of my highest values, is just personal freedom. And then as an elected official, I think my third top value is flexibility. And that's something like open-mindedness. But basically the attitude that when you know better, when you have better information, you can change your mind and you can adapt. Adaptability and flexibility. And I think if more elected officials, whether you're Republican or Democrat or progressive or conservative, had these values, especially of transparency and flexibility, I think that voters and people we serve would be much happier.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We want to honor your time and just appreciate you stopping in and joining with us. So thank you so much, Megan, and thank you for what you're doing personally for the state of Nebraska, because that affects me. So
thank you. I know I didn't get to all of your questions, and so if any of you would like to continue the conversation, I urge you, I'll put my username on here. Reach out to me on Twitter. That's like my favorite channel. And I'm also on Instagram. And then my email is mhunt@ledge.ne.gov. So that's it.
Awesome. Do you have a website? You're not running you're not running till 2022. So
I mean, still give me money, but like.
Yes. Well, that's what, okay. MeganForNebraska.com. Thank you. So this group likes to, share the wealth. So,
If you can't contribute to me, like there's obviously so much going on right now. Like I'm not up for re-election. Like do not donate to me. Let's elect the people we need to elect, and then also support Black Lives Matter and everything else going on. So, but what helps me a lot is when you just spread the word. So just tell your friends that I exist, and that would be really helpful.
Relational organizing.
Thank you.
awesome.
All right.
Thank you so much, Meg. Have a great night.
Thank you, Megan. We appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Okay. Wes?
Awesome. Well, hopefully you enjoyed that conversation with Megan. And really, as Andy and I were, looking at questions that were submitted and thinking about discussions, a lot of, it's kind of the same questions we asked Megan can really be great discussions for us as a group. But I did want to, I think I saw late in the chat, Kate brought up ranked choice voting and how that could give more voice to a person. So just curious to what people think about that in terms of a democratic value.
Kate has been working on that here in San Diego, so she has a little bit of insight, I think.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kate.
Yeah, so after Pete dropped out of the race, I started looking for local things to get behind, and this really intrigued me, and have been learning a little bit more about it. San Diego currently has a top 2 primary, which means that the top 2 vote getters, no matter what party they're from, will go on to the general election. And it's like the first step that would actually get us to the ability to rank choice voting, which would be top 4 in the primary, no matter what party a person is from. And then in the general election, the ability to rank choice your vote. And the nice thing about that is people running are, some of the things that happen, people who are running are trying to not just wedge in with their own little group of people and get more people to their group. They actually have to play nice across the field, and they have to make their case more broadly, because people's second choices might become a vote for you if they get dropped out of the race, if somebody gets dropped out of the race. So so I brought that up with our speaker, Megan, because she was talking about how the progressives and as we read in Lakoff, that the progressives have so many swim lanes, and we each have a pet part of the Progressive Party that we support, but I would be willing to listen to more than just, my little swim lane if I knew that I could rank choice vote, and I'd be thinking beyond just my one little area of expertise or area of desire. So that was my thought with that comment.
Yeah, so there's been a couple of comments in chat, just to clarify. First of all, California has what's called jungle primaries. It's statewide. Like Kate said, top 2 vote getters in the primary, no matter the party, goes on to the general. What that means in practicality is in a lot of places, we have 2 Democrats running against each other. And which obviously, that presents a whole other sort of bunch of issues. But somebody asked if ranked choice voting was kind of like caucusing. Yeah, caucusing is kind of like ranked choice voting in person. And Nevada actually did a form of ranked choice voting in their early caucus this year. And I don't know how close you followed the Nevada caucuses, but for 4 days, the week before the actual in-person caucus, there were places that people could go and just fill out a form with their top 4 choices in order, which is ranked choice voting. So it let people who couldn't stand around for 6 hours in a caucus vote and still have their voices be heard. So it's easy to implement it's easy, like technically speaking, logistically speaking. Obviously politically is different, but that's a little bit of background.
And Maine, I believe it's Maine, is
Yes.
the state that statewide,
Yes.
they do ranked choice voting.
Yes.
Does anyone want to add any like anti-ranked choice voting or their thoughts?
Steven? Hold on, let me find you. Oh my goodness, there's just too many people. No, not too many people. It's great. There we go.
Yes. Ranked choice voting isn't really any better than what we have as first past the post voting. Ranked choice voting, you're taking, if no one gets 50% plus 1, you're taking the least, person with the least amount of votes and using those votes to put up into the people who have the most of, to spread out again.
Whoever gets dropped
that doesn't
out.
make much sense. I'm in Canada. I'm with an organization called Fair Vote Canada, and we're looking at proportional representation, which is used in over 80 countries in the world. And you and the states have the same problem that we have in terms of, in our last election, the person who got the most percentage of votes didn't get to be the prime minister. In your last election, you had Hillary Clinton, who had more votes than Donald Trump, and she didn't get to be the leader of your country. So to me, that doesn't make any sense.
I think I don't want to interrupt, Stephen. Go ahead and finish, and then I'll put my thought into the pool there.
Yeah. If a certain percentage of people vote for a party and that doesn't reach the 50+1 threshold, it's been shown that working together with other parties has been much more successful. And I think this whole COVID thing, I know in Canada, the whole COVID pandemic, has shown that parties can work together and very successfully. Our Medicare in Canada, our employment insurance in Canada, I can't remember, one other thing came out of coalition governments. So those things work well, and over 80 countries use it. So why aren't we, both the US and Canada, looking at that kind of thing more seriously?
A good question. I was going to say that, yeah, Hillary Clinton got the popular vote, but, you know, didn't get the Electoral College. That's a whole other thing. That's another, maybe we'd call it a debacle, but
it's the same thing in Canada.
If the Jill Steins or the back in the day with Ross Perot or whatever those third party people are that do have valid ideas and they do take a certain amount of vote. I don't want to lose those voices, but if you knew that you could vote for your top, but if your top isn't the majority, then, and your person got dropped out, then your second choice would get those votes and it would push them over the top. So I'm not sure that it, like, if we had ranked choice voting, maybe Hillary Clinton would have been our president. I don't think that this is going to be something in the United States that is going to happen in any short period of time, and even probably less so representative. Sorry, I forgot the term that you used for it, but the percentage representation. But at the local levels, think about how somebody like Megan, and in Nebraska, it's sort of interesting. They don't have, I didn't know that they were unicameral, but anyway, in California, in any one of these states at the local levels, it could be just a really interesting way to take I just sort of lost the word that I'm looking for. Take the sting or the negative campaigning out a little bit, and also allow people to feel like they could choose their best most, but then realize that they should really not be so ingrained on one way and one way only that they might listen to a broader range of people. So I liked that idea. I think it poses an interesting idea for.
Well, and very like, you know, because these are newer, fresh conversations within. I can only speak for the states here, but you know, whether it's ranked choice voting or proportional voting. So it'll be very interesting to see how that dialogue continues to go about within our systems. So our next, a question that we didn't get to with Megan, but kind of just wanted to pose it to the group. And so just like we did in past, if you would like to comment on the question, you can do your raise hand feature or comment in the chat. And then if you have other questions, I'm going to be honest, guys, none of you submitted a question. So Andy and I came up with them all. So if you come up with things, please shoot them in the chat. But a question we came up with was, Lakoff talks about radical versus gradual change. And Megan kind of addressed that with idealistic versus pragmatic progressivism. And so just curious, people's thoughts. What place does gradual and radical change have in the progressive politics? So if you have thoughts on that, raise your hand or comment in the chat and we'll unmute you.
I'm sure we've all had encounters with both people on both sides of this. So anyone? How do you?
And I'm a teacher, so I like silence until someone says that.
I'm not. I find silence very awkward. So Liz Cole. All right. Liz Cole, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm concerned about, Joe Biden and progressives, because he will be the most progressive president to have ever run for president, but he is not meeting their purity test of some further left progressives. And so they were, well, I know Twitter's not real life, but I mean, some of them are talking about, well, I'm not going to vote for him. Pete was very progressive, but he just used such different language. He got dismissed as a corporate shill. It's like, actually take a look at what they are advocating, what their policy platforms are. They're progressive, maybe not as progressive as you want them to be, but look at our alternatives. Either some progress or the continuation of oppression and the destruction of our democracy. That's what's at stake. So I know it's not a perfect choice in your mind, but it's a choice that has to be made. And sometimes you just need to vote against somebody, even if you're not fully on board with who you're voting for.
Awesome. Thank you, Liz. Does anyone, particularly maybe if you believe radical change is necessary, particularly in this upcoming election, does anyone want to raise their hand and maybe talk about the need for radical change within the progressive movement?
We have Lori.
I was going to say that I think in general, younger people, the Gen Z and the millennials are more apt to be comfortable with more radical change. Whereas the older we get, the more comfortable we are with, okay, a little change is good. Let's just try this and see if this works. And then we'll change a little more. Whereas, the younger people are like, this isn't working. Let's change it. And, I think they're more, at least in my opinion, judging from my own kids and the ages that their friends are, they're more apt to feel that a more radical change is what we need to get something done, because they've seen, years of not getting things done.
And Christy?
Oh, okay. I would like to speak to that, just
Sure.
because I too have teenagers, and I've been speaking to my son and his best friends who are Bernie supporters, who are very much about burn everything down and start over. And I think that they like the idea of radical change, but I don't actually think that they know what radical change is. Like they think this is what they want, but because they don't actually know what's behind all the change or what even builds the structure of their lives, because they're between 16 and 25, and they're still under the protection of their parents for the most part. The people who are talking like this, at least where I live, all the Bernie supporters are very much white people, white teenagers who are protected by their parents. And this idea that everything will just burn down and we'll just be able to easily rebuild is something that they just think it's just going to happen like that with no consequence. And I don't think they've ever felt real pain. So the idea of pain isn't real. So asking and demanding for real, radical, dramatic, immediate change is easy to ask for. And they're willing to fight for it because they don't know the true cost. Which is why I hesitate to say that I would not speak for all minorities, but you will see that a lot of minorities are a lot more conservative in their demands and how they want to see change. I mean, they demand change, they want change, they know that things have to change, but they're not, they're not the Bernie Bros saying things gotta burn. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Um, I actually have a thought about this too. You know, I guess I can see where they're coming from, and I understand that a lot of the radical change people that are a little bit older, they do exist, not just kids. Um, they've seen us trying to do gradual change for so long, and it feels like nothing has changed. So they're like, they get to the nothing's working, let's burn it all down stage, which is a little different than the idealism of youth, which I think I remember being a college student and wanting the revolution, right? And you know, there's something about you know, lived experience that tends to not not make you less liberal or less progressive, but moderate your expectations. But if you don't have those goals, I think a lot of the people that think that nothing's changing and they want radical change feel like the moderates have lost the goal and lost their vision of what we can do. I personally, because I worked for the government, I know how, and I didn't work, I wasn't a politician. I worked on the budgeting and acquisition side of the government, and I know how slow and terribly bureaucratic and everything is. And so the realist part of me goes, I know what they want, but I understand that it cannot happen the way they want it. However, on the flip side, look at what's happened in 2 weeks. Radical change, right? We'll see if more places follow through, but maybe there's something to it, because I mean, it took basically half the country rioting in the streets or protesting in the streets, but here we have this radical idea that all of a sudden places are actually considering, and not just lip service. They're actually, like Minneapolis voted to do it. It's been done in Camden, New Jersey, like completely remake policing. So I don't know. I think what Wes said is right. There's a place for both. So.
Yeah, and Stefan, I like your comment. How would Lakoff handle? You know, we asked Megan the question about the whole slogan of defund the police, abolish the police, and you know, Megan admitted that that can mean very different things to the individuals who choose to use those slogans or whatnot. And I know, look, Lakoff talks about how slogans are not framing. You know, you're not going to reframe through slogans. And so, you know, I've just been personally reflecting. We live in a very social media driven world, short headlines. I'll admit, I sometimes just read headlines. And so how, with the current issue of the police and our police reform, how can we correctly frame this message that so many people are listening to and willing to take action on? What framing do you think we need to be using to see these reforms happen? So curious of what your guys' thoughts are on this current issue today.
Well, I have something else to say then. Sorry, I get started talking about something. I mentioned this.
You're gonna pause. You have to wait.
Oh.
In case someone else wants to.
I know. Well, anyone else? Well, I just want to say, you know, we've seen framing working in real time through this past 2 weeks. Remember, it started the mainstream media and everybody was talking about the rioting and the looting and all this stuff. And now it's police brutality and it's actually working. The framing, we've managed to change the language and change the narrative to our narrative. Now we have to keep keep on track, but let's see, who was it? Jenna, would you like to comment? let's see. No? Okay, that's all right.
No, I got it.
Oh, okay, there you go.
Well, I mean, everything is actually happening so fast. I can't believe, I mean, my mind has changed. I mean, Christy and I were talking a little bit yesterday just about the whole defund the police, slogan, and how I literally saw it probably for the first time maybe a week ago on the weekend. Yeah. So it's Monday, like a week ago, sometime last week. A friend of my oldest daughter, so they're 22 in college, and I saw an Instagram post of her about, we have to abolish the police. I think she used both abolish and defund. And I had never even entertained that. Like, I never even thought of that because I just haven't gotten that far, because the police do not affect me. I live my happy little privileged life, and it's over there. I don't think about it. So this is the first time, I was confronted, and and my first reaction was, no, we can't do that, and not really understanding what it meant. And then I literally 24 hours later, I probably did a complete 180 after just doing a little research, like, what does this mean to defund? What does it mean? And it might mean different things, like Megan was saying too, to different groups, and it'll be interesting to see what actually happens in Minneapolis. But also, so that's one thing. It was like within 24 hours, I had completely changed my view on it, and just things that I'm reading, but things are happening fast, at such an accelerated level. It's a little chaotic, but it's also kind of exhilarating too. And then today I saw a post on Instagram where they actually listed, and I can't even remember what the group is, but I think I shared it on my story, but they listed like all the things that have been done in the last week and a half. I mean, and it was just so much, and it was really astonishing, when I don't think I've ever seen that before. So, I think Wes had mentioned earlier, maybe, there's room for both. Because I think being a Pete supporter too, I definitely was on the the pragmatic, because you don't want to scare people into thinking, don't take away my health care and that kind of stuff. But it's interesting to just witness how quickly things have happened, just recently. I've never seen that before. So it can happen. And, so far there's a lot of success going on too right now. So I don't know, I'm babbling.
No, it's okay. Liz, you wanted to say something? Liz, cool.
Yeah, so I've been around part of the conversation about policing. I have been posting that I'm a licensed professional counselor. My profession has a code of ethics and standards of practice. I have liability insurance. My liability insurance will cover me unless I violate the code of ethics and standards of practice. Then I'm on the hook, and I'm personally liable, and I could lose everything. That is a strong motivation for me to practice within the code of ethics and standards of practice. The same should be true for the police. They should have qualified immunity, they call it, where they're not personally on the hook if they're operating within, the department policies and procedures as they are defined after they're reformed. And if they kill unjustly or illegally, if they use excessive force against policy, if they engage in racial profiling, they should be personally on the hook. That will change those behaviors because those individuals do not want to lose everything.
Yeah. So Liz, sorry to interrupt. They
have no skin in the game. Yeah.
How would you suggest framing that conversation and those issues that you are talking about to ensure that the progressive message is heard in a way that leads to action, whether that's right away or a year from now? Do you have any suggestions for framing?
Well, okay, look at licensed professions, doctors, nurses, social workers, counselors, all kinds of people, right? You can look at your state licensing boards for occupations and professions and see all kinds of occupations that are regulated by the state. Police aren't on there. And, you know, as a licensed occupation. So we already accept that there is the concept of malpractice, you know, in these other professions. There should be a concept of malpractice in policing. We just extend what already exists, but broaden it to include policing.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, because it's so complex. And as Andy and I were talking, the reason we picked this question is because if we aren't sharing, like Jana shared her personal growth and understanding and learning, and if we're not continuing to share those resources that help us better understand it, then we're going to allow conservatives to win the framing of this. So I think it's very critical that we reflect on this, learn, especially if we are individuals with privilege, particularly white privilege, but then also sharing our growth and learning so that is the narrative versus the conservatives winning the narrative.
Right. Now,
I really like sorry. Go ahead.
The way that it kind of transcends partisanship is that everybody already accepts ethics, standards of practice in these professions. And why do we have licensing of these other professions? It's because you're either working with vulnerable people or health or things that are very expensive, like building contractors, you know, and lawyers. You know, important things are at stake. Well, I think a person's life is the most important thing at stake, you know, and so this should be a statutorily regulated occupation within the state. So I think, you know, because everybody already accepts that frame, we can extend it to include this occupation.
I just have a quick update I just saw on Twitter. I don't know if any of you are in Indiana. I know actually Jenny's in Indiana. I guess Indianapolis is Marion County, and they just unanimously passed a proposal that declared racism a public health crisis. And I know, framing racism as a public health crisis is another option that I've seen people talking about. So I just thought that was interesting. I do have a hand raised. That's Lily. Lily, I'm going to ask you to unmute. Go ahead. Yep. There you go. Oh, no, you're still muted.
There. Okay.
Okay.
So I was just looking up on the liability insurance, and it looks like more and more, maybe not individually they have it, liability insurance, but the police departments probably do because they need money for a lot of the settlements that they've had. So I think it is, I don't know if it's widely covered or not. That was one thing. I kind of had a comment about what we talked about, or I just lost the one that you were just saying, oh, public health.
No, go ahead. Yeah,
oh,
go ahead.
I was thinking back on what we were talking about, you know, young people having a certain position, about being more radical or whatever. And I just had the experience with my oldest daughter who just found this to be her cause, you know, and this kind of awoke her. You know, I tried moving her into Pete earlier when we were working on Pete, and it was like, nah. You know, and this has all of a sudden like, I'm all for it, you know, defund the police, whatever. And I was thinking in her case, because she's a little older and she's very analytical, she's a chemist by trade. She, I think it's because she hasn't had the experience of seeing, you know, the results of her actions and how it might be slower than just, you know, turning things upside down. But like you said, I think a good combination of having the passion, which we don't lose with age or anything, but also, you know, with the reality and the pragmatic attitude of knowing what can be done and what can't be done. And I've seen that with other people that have gone from Bernie supporters to say like Pete supporters or whatever, where you see that transition as experience kind of shows you that, you know, sometimes we can't get things done overnight.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you for sharing. By the way, we're past our hour time.
Yeah.
So I do want to honor your time. I just noticed that. So if you need to go, feel free to leave. I think I'll speak for myself, but thank you guys so much. It was really cool to see a growth in our book club, and I think the other thing I really love is seeing voices that weren't originally part of Building Bridges. And so if that is one of you, thank you so much for joining us. And we're in the process of choosing our next book. That hasn't been decided, but we'll be putting out a poll via social media. So you can always email. But really thank you, because I think it's been a great discussion with such a diverse group of people from across the country, from various places on the progressive spectrum. And so just thank you for taking time these 3 weeks. Yeah, so Andy, I don't know if you want to say anything real quick to everyone.
Yeah, I do. If you want to discuss this more in the terms of how to move forward yourself in, you know, building a grassroots group or working within your communities, we do have our grassroots discussion series, and that's on Thursday nights. You can find the links for those on our social media as well. Sign up for that. Kaz, who lives in Colorado, she's leading that, and it is a really phenomenal discussion. We're talking about getting out the vote. We're talking about how to, if you want to form your own group in your own community, you can do that. Oh, there's the link. Wes put it in chat. Awesome. And watch your email or watch our social media. We will put out a poll for the next book that we're going to be reading. We have a few candidates. So, and yeah, join us on Thursday. It's a great discussion. Anything else, Wes?
No, so I think if you have to get off, feel free, but we'll stick around for about 18 more minutes and can kind of just continue the discussion about what we read. I will personally say I really enjoyed reading what that part about what unites progressives. And you know, Megan, kind of when we were asked the question, what can be done to improve progressive unity? And I think that's what's a cool thing about each one of us. I don't know all your stories, but Bridges is a grassroots organization because we really believe in the power that we can have in our own individual networks and what we're personally passionate about as progressives. And so, you know, just curious if you guys have thoughts as you read part 5, what ideas do you have that can help unify progressives? So raise your hand, comment in the chat, and we'll unmute you. Or if you want to expand on what Megan said as well. So David, you just made the comment. Would you like to talk?
Sure. Something that comes up in the book a lot, and also in his Freedom book, is that America is historically a progressive nation, that the framers of this Constitution built a system that was designed to evolve, that's capable of evolving and capable of change. And I think that's something that I have found as an interesting starting point with conservatives who think that we were founded as a Christian nation. And if you look at the history, we were not. The whole idea was to keep religion and secular political issues in separate planes. And there's this sort of progressive streak that kind of peaked right, during the FDR administration, which also triggered the conservative movement that we now see kind of in its spring bloom under Trump. So I don't know. That's my thought this evening.
So David,
And I think it's very much connected with what we're seeing in terms of the protests, because it's like there's a promise there that has not been fulfilled.
and I almost wonder, and Lakoff talks about that, is, maybe it's a realignment of progressives, how we really need to realize how those basic American foundations or values are truly progressives, and just need to talk more and more about freedom. Megan mentioned it's one of her top 3 values, but continuing to talk about how all these issues are related to freedom. You don't have freedom if you are nervous when you get pulled over from the police. You do not have freedom if you have to teach your kid when they go to the store to make sure that receipt is readily available to access as you're walking out the door. That is not freedom. And so when you commented that, it just made me think of really going back to what America was built on and communicating those. I think it was mentioned in the chat, this Facebook group I'm in, and someone asked, like, should we even be talking about freedom because that's a conservative value? No, I really think we should, because it is a progressive value. So I don't know.
No, you can unmute yourselves now since we're down to 17 people in the chat. So I think that's enough that if you want to talk, unmute yourself. And then when you're done, mute yourself again. So I don't have to, you won't get that little pop-up, which is kind of annoying. Go ahead, Stephen.
Well, you said what I wrote in the chat, Wes. I said that, yes, Megan talked about freedom, but freedom means different things to a conservative and different things to a progressive. And we've got to find the common ground and work from there.
Yeah, I like that.
Agreed.
Anyone else have ideas of how to bring unity within the progressive movement sphere?
I think with freedom language too, oh, my train of thought just derailed. What was I going to say?
Sounds like me.
Oh, yeah. I'm pretty crafty because I have Republican family members, I have Democrat family members. I hear both, both sides all the time. And like, some of the agenda things that we want as Democrats or progressives, say like when American Care Act or Affordable Care Act, ACA, was coming out, I was trying to appeal to Republicans and conservatives by saying, just think of all the entrepreneurial energy that this will release. People stay at jobs, sometimes miserable and underproductive, because they're tied there strictly on the issue of health insurance. And if that ceased to be a concern, we would see an explosion of small business growth in this country. And so like learning to recast some of our things in a way that appeals to conservatives as a way to build that bridge.
That was good. And Lakoff would be proud because you did not call it the other term that the media and the conservatives have drilled into our brain.
Yeah. I still can't get over those.
I live in Kentucky, so I was coaching a newly arrived campaign staffer for Amy McGrath today, And I'm like, don't call it Obamacare. The O word shall not be mentioned. Follow their lead. If they bring it up and they're positive, then that's fine.
Sorry, my dog's barking again. I'm gonna mute myself.
Does anyone else have any other thoughts, different questions they want to pose? Stephan, go ahead.
Sorry, I was thinking the other day, it's like, are we more broad and complex in our common denominators or whatever than what they are, and that makes us more hard to find those unite? Because I was reading about how he said, there's from this side, where it's affected you personally, to this side where, you don't have that experience or whatever. And then again, and I think that's what makes it more complex for us to have like a united, oh, we're all together on this one, because I'll see some things and I go, well, I do support it, but I can't identify with it or something, and where I think for them, it's a little more simplistic in a way, which makes it easier to manage and turn. You think?
I think that falls in line with us having the big tent and them being willing to be sheep, which nothing has proven that more than a Trump administration, where people who, Lindsey Grahams of the world, who acted like they would rather give themselves a stake in the heart than support him, are now his biggest supporters, because they fall in line no matter what. Even if it means they're all going to fall on swords, they're willing to fall in line no matter what. I think we've got to find the strength in our diversity under that big tent, instead of pulling the ties that bind out from under the tent, and so it all drops on us and we do the job for the Republicans for them.
Wes just posted in the chat an interesting comment. I wonder if part of it is telling more stories, or personal connection, empathy plays a role in helping us unifying. And there has been research about political differences, and part of it is brain differences, where the empathy centers in Democrat/progressive brains. Like, we feel more empathy towards others, not just those in our circle, where conservative/Republican empathy circuits are just for your in-group, just for your family, just for your party. And they don't necessarily feel that towards other people. You see that right now in some really awful victim blaming, like Candace Owens trying to say George Floyd is no hero, and, oh, I could just drag her. But, and even like, and I'm like, what crime did Breonna Taylor commit? She was asleep in her bed. She was an EMT, known and a friend and a colleague to the police. They know each other, and still they shot her.
Right.
Didn't George Floyd know the cop who killed him?
I hesitate to just broadly do that. You just wrote off like 39% of the population by saying they lack empathy. I don't think that's really,
it's just wired differently. It's not that they lack it. It's just
I don't think that's the case, though, because I think that we have to change our approach on how we speak to them, because I've been reading a lot about deep canvassing, and I was just listening to a really good example of it. It wasn't meant to be deep canvassing, but that's basically what it was. I listened to a TED Talk yesterday for somebody who I actually very much dislike. He's a Black author for New York Times. And the only time I really see him is on New York Times and on Twitter. And he comes across as this smug, preachy shit, and I just have this reflexive, like, oh my God, I don't want to listen to him. But
guys, I have to go, so Wes is going to take it from here. Sorry, guys. Thanks. All right.
And I listened to his personal story